The crimson alert lights cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Galactic Assembly Hall. For 3,000 years, this chamber had been the beating heart of civilized space. Representatives from 1,400 species had gathered, here to debate, argue, and ultimately decide the fate of trillions of beings across the galaxy. Today, it might witness the end of everything. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the human delegation's podium, her hands gripping the edges so tightly. Her knuckles had gone white. Around her, the amphitheater buzzed with nervous energy. Insectoid Zephyrians clicked their mandibles in distress. The crystalline ethereals hummed in frequencies that made the air itself vibrate with tension. Even the ancient keepers, whose species had founded the assembly, shifted uneasily in their floating meditation pods. "The chair recognizes the human delegation," announced Prime Arbiter Kethvar, his reptilian voice carrying across the vast chamber through bioacoustic amplifiers. The old Draknari had presided over the assembly for 2 centuries, but Elena had never seen him look so afraid. Elena cleared her throat. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. 1,400 species held their breath. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to say. "The Terran Coalition has reached a decision regarding the Devour threat." A ripple of movement swept through the assembled representatives. The Devour, a term that had become synonymous with extinction itself. For 6 months, the ravenous swarm had been cutting a path of destruction through the Outer Rim territories. Entire star systems had gone dark, billions had died, and the Assembly had done nothing but debate. "After careful consideration," Elena continued, "humanity formally withdraws from the Galactic Assembly, effective immediately." The chamber erupted. Delegates leaped to their feet, tentacles, and various appendages. The Zephyrian Queen Mothers translator sparked with profanity in 17 languages. The ethereal collective's harmonics ceased abruptly, replaced by what could only be described as a crystalline shriek of disbelief. But Elena wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "the Terran Coalition declares the Outer Rim territories under human protection. Any species wishing to evacuate will be granted safe passage to Coalition space. Those who wish to stand and fight, well, we'll see what humans are really made of." Prime Arbiter Kethvar slammed his gavel, a ceremonial crystal that had been carved from the first asteroid humans had ever mined. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, his voice carrying undertones of desperation, "you cannot simply leave. The Assembly has protocols, procedures. The vote on military intervention is scheduled for next week." "Next week?" Elena laughed, and there was something sharp and dangerous in the sound. "Prime Arbiter, the Devourer will consume the Kepler colony in 3 days. The mining station at Vega Prime went silent this morning. How many more will die while you debate?" She gestured to the massive holographic display that dominated the center of the chamber. Red markers indicated Devourer incursions, and there were so many more than there had been just hours ago. "The human delegation has submitted all necessary withdrawal documentation," Elena continued, "as per Article 847 of the Assembly Charter. We are exercising our right to sovereign independence. The paperwork is in order." A new voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. It was Senator Hylas of the Centauri Republic, his blue skin flushed with anger. "You can't protect an entire sector with just human ships. It's suicide." Elena turned to face him, and for a moment, something flickered in her eyes, something that made the senator take a step back. "Senator," she said quietly, "you clearly don't know humans very well." Behind her, the other human delegates were already packing their belongings. Admiral Marcus Chun, the Coalition's military liaison, was speaking rapidly into his comm unit. Dr. Sarah Kim, the science advisor, was uploading data files to portable drives. They moved with the efficiency of people who had already accepted what was coming. The Terran Coalition thanks the Assembly for 3 centuries of cooperation, Elena said formally. We wish you well in your future endeavors. She turned to leave, her delegation falling in behind her. But as she reached the chamber's exit, Prime Arbiter Kethfer called out one final time. Ambassador, where will you go? How will you possibly stand against something that has devoured entire civilizations? Elena paused at the threshold. When she looked back, her expression was calm, almost serene. We're going home, Prime Arbiter, to remind the galaxy why humanity used to be called the War Makers. The doors sealed behind them with a soft hiss. In the silence that followed, delegates from 1,400 species stared at the empty space, where humanity had stood. For the first time in 3,000 years, they were truly alone, and in the depths of space, something vast and hungry continued its inexorable advance toward the heart of civilization. The bridge of the TSS Indomitable hummed with quiet efficiency. Captain Maria Santos stood before the main view screen, watching the stars wheel past as her ship cut through hyperspace. Behind her, the crew worked with the focused intensity of people who knew they were racing against time. Status report, she said without turning around. Hyperspace exit in 20 minutes, Captain, reported Lieutenant Commander James Park from the navigation station. We're about to enter the Kepler system. Communications? Santos asked. Still nothing from the colony, ma'am, came the reply from Ensign Rodriguez. Last transmission was 18 hours ago. Standard mining report, everything normal. Santos nodded grimly. In her 15 years as a coalition captain, she'd learned to read between the lines. When a colony went silent, it usually meant one of 2 things: technical failure or total annihilation. Given what they were up against, she wasn't optimistic about technical failure. Tactical. I want full sensor sweeps the moment we drop out of hyperspace. Science. Prepare the probe arrays. If there's anything left of Kepler colony, I want to know about it. The bridge fell silent except for the soft beeping of instruments. Santos had commanded the Indomitable for 3 years now, and she'd never seen her crew this tense. The Devourer had that effect on people. It wasn't just another enemy. It was something that challenged everything they understood about warfare, about survival, about the very nature of life itself. Captain, called out Dr. Jiang from the science station, I'm picking up some unusual readings ahead. Define unusual, Doctor. It's hard to explain. There's a disturbance in the quantum foam, almost like reality itself is being stretched. I've never seen anything like it. Santos felt a chill run down her spine. The scientists back on Earth had theorized about what the Devourer actually was, not just a species, but something that existed partially outside normal space-time. The readings Dr. Jiang was describing matched those theories perfectly. Captain, dropping out of hyperspace in 10 seconds, Park announced. All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. The familiar sensation of hyperspace transition washed over the bridge crew. For a moment, the stars stretched into lines and then snapped back into familiar points of light. The Kepler system spread out before them, or what was left of it. Jesus. Christ, whispered someone from the back of the bridge. The Kepler colony had been built on a small rocky planet, the 3rd in the system. It had been home to 50,000 miners and their families, a thriving community that had provided rare Earth elements to the Coalition for over a century. Now, there was nothing, not empty space, not debris, not even the planet itself. There was simply nothing. A spherical void roughly the size of where the planet used to be, like someone had taken a cosmic spoon and scooped out a chunk of reality. "Sensors are going crazy," Dr. Jiang reported, his voice tight with controlled fear. "The quantum readings are off the charts. It's like space-time is healing itself where the planet used to be." Santos stared at the void, trying to process what she was seeing. In all her years of military service, she'd seen war, destruction, the ugly realities of interstellar conflict. But this was different. This was obliteration on a scale that shouldn't be possible. "Captain," Park said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission." "From who?" "There's nothing out there." "That's just it, ma'am." "The transmission is coming from the void itself." Santos felt her blood turn to ice. "Put it through." The bridge speakers crackled to life. What came through wasn't exactly sound. It was something that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the primal fear centers of the brain. It was the whisper of entropy, the sigh of dying stars, the final breath of civilizations, but somehow, impossibly, it formed words. Hunger. Eternal ... grow ... consume more. The transmission cut off. In the silence that followed, Santos could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "Captain," Dr. Jiang said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm detecting movement. Something big is approaching from the outer system." On the view screen, space began to darken. Not the clean darkness of empty void, but something deeper, more profound. It was darkness with weight, with presence, with malevolent intelligence. "How big?" Santos asked. "Bigger than anything in our databases. It's the size of a small moon." As they watched, the darkness began to take shape. It wasn't a ship, not in any conventional sense. It was organic, writhing, covered in what looked like scales the size of city blocks. Tendrils of energy crackling around its bulk, and along its surface, thousands of smaller shapes moved like antibodies in a bloodstream. "My God," Dr. Jiang breathed, "it's not just one creature. It's a collective, a swarm intelligence." Santos hit the intercom. "All hands, prepare for immediate hyperspace jump. We are leaving this system now." But as the Indomitable began to turn, something wrapped around the ship. Not physical tendrils, something else. Something that reached through dimensions Santos didn't even know existed. "Captain, hyperspace drive is offline," Park reported. "Whatever that thing is, it's got us locked in normal space." Santos closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with grim determination. "All weapons, open fire. Target the largest mass concentration." The Indomitable's fusion cannons blazed to life, sending streams of superheated plasma toward the approaching nightmare. The beams struck the creature's surface and ... did nothing. They were absorbed, metabolized, incorporated into the swarms. Growing mass. "It's feeding on our weapons," Dr. Jiang said in horror. "The energy is making it stronger." Santos was about to order a retreat when her communications officer suddenly straightened. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Coalition fleet. Admiral Chen is requesting immediate status report." "Tell the Admiral we found the Devourer," Santos said grimly. "And tell him to hurry." On the view screen, the swarm had begun to accelerate toward them. In the distance, Santos could see other dark shapes moving through the asteroid belt. More swarms, dozens of them, all converging on the Indomitable's position. But as fear threatened to overwhelm her, Santos remembered something Elena Vasquez had said during the evacuation briefings. Humanity had been called the War Makers for a reason. They had survived ice ages, world wars, alien invasions, and the collapse of their first space colonies. They had earned their reputation through blood, sweat, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. "Dr. Jiang," she said, her voice steady, "you said the swarm feeds on energy. What happens if we give it more than it can handle? The scientist's eyes widened as he understood. Captain, if we overload the fusion reactors ... The explosion would be visible from 3 star systems, Santos finished. And maybe, just maybe, it would hurt these things. She turned to address her crew. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to send a message to the galaxy. We're going to show them what happens when you threaten human colonies. The bridge fell silent. Then, one by one, her officers began to nod. Overload the reactors, Santos ordered. Let's light up the darkness. The emergency session of the Galactic Assembly had been called within hours of the Kepler incident. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered in the Great Chamber, their faces, or equivalent expressions of concern, reflecting the gravity of the situation. Prime Arbiter Kethfer stood at the central podium, his reptilian features grave. Fellow delegates, we have received confirmation from our monitoring stations. The Kepler system has been completely consumed. 50,000 beings gone without a trace. A murmur of horror rippled through the assembled crowd. The Zephyrian Queen Mother's translator crackled with distress signals. The ethereal collective's harmonic song had taken on a mournful tone. However, Kethfer continued, we have also received preliminary reports from the human vessel that was investigating the system. The TSS Indomitable managed to transmit sensor data before their heroic sacrifice. The chamber fell silent. Even species that had never liked humans felt a chill at the mention of sacrifice. The data confirms our worst fears, Kethfer said. The Devourer is not simply a species. It is a collective consciousness, a swarm intelligence that exists partially, outside our normal space-time. It doesn't just destroy, it consumes reality itself. Senator Hylas of the Centauri Republic raised his hand. Prime Arbiter, what of the human fleet? Surely they cannot hope to stand against such a threat? Kethfer's expression was unreadable. The human coalition has been unusually quiet since their withdrawal. Our intelligence suggests they have consolidated their forces around the Sol system, but beyond that ... He spread his hands helplessly. They're hiding, scoffed Ambassador Tlin of the Rigel Confederacy. Humans always were cowards at heart. The words had barely left his mouth when the chamber's main doors burst open. Admiral Marcus Chun strode in, still wearing his coalition military uniform, his face grim with purpose. Behind him came a small contingent of human soldiers, their weapons clearly visible. Prime Arbiter, Chun said, his voice carrying clearly across the chamber, I request permission to address the assembly. Kethfer looked confused. Admiral, the human delegation has withdrawn. You have no standing here. I'm not here as a delegate, Chun replied. I'm here as a soldier, and I have a message for the galaxy. Without waiting for permission, Chun activated a portable holographic projector. The image that appeared above. The chamber was a tactical display of the Outer Rim territories. Red markers indicated Devourer incursions, but there were also blue markers, human fleet positions. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted beings, Chen began. 3 days ago, the Terran Coalition made a decision. We decided to remind the galaxy why our species was once called the War Makers. The display shifted, showing real-time footage from the Vega system. A massive human fleet hung in space, not the sleek, elegant vessels that most species favored, but brutal, functional warships, bristling with weapons. The Devourer consumed the Kepler colony, Chun continued. They killed 50,000 innocent people. They destroyed the TSS Indomitable and her crew of 800. They made the mistake of thinking that would intimidate us. The footage changed again. This time, it showed the Devourer swarm, the same horrifying collective that had destroyed Kepler, approaching the Vega system. The dark mass writhed through space, its tendrils reaching out to consume everything in its path. They were wrong, Chun said simply. What happened next would be remembered as the Battle of Vega Prime. The human fleet didn't retreat. They didn't attempt to negotiate. They attacked. But this wasn't the conventional warfare the Assembly was familiar with. Human ships dove directly into the swarm, their hulls covered in strange devices that pulsed with dangerous energy. When the Devourer tried to feed on their weapons, the ships exploded, not from damage, but by design. Thermonuclear mines, Chun. Explained to the horrified Assembly. Each ship carries 50. When the swarm tries to consume them, they detonate inside the creature's feeding apparatus. The footage showed the results. The Devourer Collective writhed in what could only be described as pain. Sections of its bulk were torn away, vaporized by the nuclear fire. For the first time since the swarm had appeared, it was hurt. But that's not the message, Chun continued. The message is what happened next. The display shifted to show the human fleet regrouping. But instead of celebrating their victory, they were already moving toward the next system, and the next, and the next. The Terran Coalition has mobilized every military vessel, every armed transport, every ship capable of carrying weapons, Chun said. We are not defending our territory, we are hunting. The implications hit the Assembly like a physical blow. The humans weren't just fighting the Devourer. They were actively pursuing it, seeking it out, turning the hunt around. You're insane, whispered Senator Hylas. You can't possibly win against something like that. Chun turned to look at him, and in that moment, the Centauri senator understood why humans had been called the War Makers. There was something in the Admiral's eyes, not just determination, but a cold, calculating fury that spoke of a species that had clawed its way to the top of the food chain through sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. Senator, Chen said quietly, you're thinking like prey. The Devourer has been hunting us, consuming our colonies, killing our people. It expects us to run, to hide, to debate endlessly about the proper response. He gestured to the tactical display. But humans don't run from monsters. We make them extinct. The chamber was silent. Even the ethereal collective's harmonic song had stopped. The Coalition has a simple message for the galaxy, Chen continued. Any species that wishes to evacuate endangered territories will be granted safe passage to human space. Any species that wishes to stand and fight will be provided with weapons and tactical support. And any species that wishes to continue debating while people die. He let the sentence hang in the air. The Terran Coalition will remember who stood with us and who cowered in committee meetings. Chun deactivated the holographic display. Prime Arbiter, the human message has been delivered. We'll be returning to our ships now. As the human delegation turned to leave, Prime Arbiter Kethfer called out desperately, Admiral, wait! The Assembly can mobilize a response. We can coordinate a joint defense, Chun paused at the chamber's exit. Prime Arbiter, the time for joint defense was 6 months ago. The time for committees and votes and proper procedures was when the first colony went dark. He looked around the chamber one final time. The War Makers are awake now. We suggest you stay out of our way. The doors sealed behind them, leaving the Assembly in stunned silence. Outside, the human fleet was already beginning to move, following the trail of destruction toward the galaxy's heart, and in the depths of space, the Devourer Collective was about to learn what it meant to be hunted by humanity. The Terran Coalition fleet hung in space at the edge of the Andromeda Nebula, a wall of steel and fury that stretched across 3 light minutes. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the flagship TSS Retribution, studying the tactical displays. With the focused intensity of a man who had been hunting his prey for months, "Status report," he said without looking up. "All fleet elements report ready, Admiral. replied Commander Sarah Kim, his tactical officer. 700 warships, too? 100 support vessels and 50,000 crew members. The largest human military force ever assembled. Chun nodded grimly. It had taken them 6 months to track the main Devour collective to this place, a region of space where reality itself seemed unstable. The nebula's exotic matter created perfect conditions for the swarm to feed and grow. Intelligence suggested. This was where the invasion had begun. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Park from the sensor station, "we're detecting massive quantum disturbances at the nebula's center. The readings are, well, they're unprecedented." "Show me," Chun ordered. Main view screen flickered to life, displaying a sight that defied easy description. At the heart of the nebula, space itself seemed to be folding in on itself. Streams of matter and energy spiraled into a dark vortex that pulsed with malevolent life, and surrounding it. "Jesus," whispered Commander Kim, "how many of them are there?" The swarm stretched across light years. Thousands of the creatures they had fought at Vega Prime, but these were larger, more complex. They moved in perfect coordination, their dark forms weaving through space like the cells of some vast organism. "Computer, analyze the central anomaly," Chun ordered. The AI synthetic voice filled the bridge. Analysis complete. The central structure appears to be an artificial construct, approximately the size of Earth's moon. It is generating massive gravitational distortions and appears to be consuming matter at the quantum level. Chun felt his blood turn to ice. They're not just feeding on planets. They're feeding on the universe itself. "Admiral," Park said urgently, "we're receiving a transmission from the assembly." "It's marked Priority 1, Chun sighed. "Put it through." Prime Arbiter Kethvir's reptilian features appeared on the screen, his expression desperate. "Admiral Chun, you must withdraw immediately. Our deep space monitors have detected what you're facing. It's not just a swarm, it's a foundry. They're using the nebula to birth new collective minds." "We're aware of the situation, Prime Arbiter," Chun replied calmly. "You don't understand," Kethvir pressed. "The energy readings suggest there are millions of individual creatures. Your fleet will be overwhelmed in minutes." Chun looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were afraid. He could see it in their eyes. But they were also determined. They had come too far to turn back now. "Prime Arbiter," he said, "humanity thanks you for your concern. But we didn't come here to withdraw." "Then what did you come here to do?" Kethvir asked. Chun smiled, and there was something terrifying in the expression. "We came here to introduce the Devourer to an old human concept, total war." He cut the transmission and turned to Commander Kim. "Signal the fleet. Operation Wildfire is authorized." Kim's eyes widened. "Sir, are you certain?" "Once we begin, there's no going back." "Commander, 6 months ago, these things consumed 50,000 people at Kepler Colony. They've destroyed 17 other worlds since then. They've killed millions of innocent beings." Chun's voice was cold as space itself. "Yes, I'm certain." The tactical display showed the human fleet beginning to move. But instead of forming traditional battle lines, the ships were spreading out in a complex pattern that surrounded the entire nebula. "All ships, this is Admiral Chun," he announced over the fleet gum. "Today, we end this threat once and for all. Today we show the galaxy that humanity does not forgive. We do not forget. And we do not accept defeat." The first phase of the attack was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of engaging the swarm directly, the human ships began firing into the nebula itself. Their weapons weren't aimed at the creatures. They were aimed at the exotic matter that made up the cloud. "Sir," reported the science officer, "nebula is destabilizing. The quantum reactions are cascading." Chun nodded. "Phase 2. Deploy the Nova bombs." Across the fleet, Cargo bays opened and massive devices were launched toward the nebula's core. They weren't conventional weapons. They were stellar engineering tools, designed to trigger controlled supernovas for mining operations. But in the hands of the warmakers, they became something else entirely. The Devour Collective seemed to sense the danger. The swarm began to move, thousands of creatures streaming toward the human fleet. But they were too late. Detonation in 30 seconds, announced Commander Kim Chen watched the tactical display as the Nova bombs reached their target. The artificial construct at the nebula's heart pulsed with increasing fury, its tendrils reaching out to consume the incoming weapons. But the bombs weren't designed to be consumed. They were designed to do something much more direct. 10 seconds, Kim counted down. 5.3.2. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems. The Nova bombs detonated simultaneously, not in the nebula itself, but in the quantum substrate that supported it. The result was a chain reaction that tore through the fabric of space-time itself. The Devour Collective screamed, not with sound, but with psychic anguish that was felt by every sentient being within 100 light years. The swarm writhed in agony as its feeding ground was torn apart at the most fundamental level. But Chen wasn't finished. All ships, advance to secondary positions, he ordered. Prepare to engage survivors. The human fleet moved through the chaos like wolves among sheep. The Devour creatures, disoriented and cut off from their central intelligence, were easy prey for the Coalition's weapons. Ship after ship poured fire into the confused swarm, but as the battle raged, something unexpected happened. The remaining Devour began to retreat, fleeing toward the edge of the galaxy. They had learned something their collective intelligence had never experienced before: fear. "Admiral," reported Commander Kim, "the swarm is breaking up. They're running." Chun smiled grimly. "Signal the pursuit squadrons. Make sure they keep running." As the human fleet regrouped, a new transmission came through from the assembly. This time, it wasn't Prime Arbiter Kethfer. It was a collection of voices, dozens of species, all speaking at once. "Admiral Chun," they said in unison, "this is the Emergency War Council. We saw what you did. The entire galaxy felt it. The Devourer is retreating on all fronts." Chun looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were exhausted, scarred, but victorious. They had done what the entire Galactic Assembly had deemed impossible. "War Council," he replied, "the immediate threat has been neutralized. But there are still scattered elements of the swarm throughout the galaxy. The hunt continues." "Admiral," came a new voice, Senator Hylas of the Centauri Republic, "the Assembly wishes to apologize. We were wrong. Humanity's withdrawal was perhaps the galaxy's salvation." Chun was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired but determined. "Senator, humanity doesn't fight for apologies. We fight for survival, for justice, for the right of all species to exist without fear." He paused. "The Terran Coalition will continue to hunt down the remaining Devourer. Any species that wishes to join us is welcome. Any species that wishes to return to committees and debates, well, that's your choice." The transmission ended, leaving the bay human fleet alone in the aftermath of their victory. But across the galaxy, something had changed. The Devourer was no longer the hunter. Humanity had claimed that role. And in the depths of space, the scattered remnants of the swarm fled toward the dark between galaxies, carrying with them a new understanding of what it meant to face the warmakers. Epilogue: The New Order. 1 year later, the Terran Coalition. Memorial stood on a windswept plateau overlooking the rebuilt Kepler colony. Carved from black granite quarried from Earth's moon, it bore the names of every human who had died in the fight in the War Against the Devourer, Captain Maria Santos. The crew of the TSS Indomitable. The 50,000 colonists who had vanished in the first attack. Thousands of others who had sacrificed everything to protect the galaxy. Elena Vasquez, now wearing the uniform of Coalition High Command, stood before the memorial as the sun set over the new colony. The rebuilding had taken 6 months, but the settlement was already thriving. Humans, Zephyrians, Ethereals, and dozens of other species worked side by side, united by shared purpose. The dedication ceremony went well, said Admiral Chun, joining her at the memorial. The Centauri delegation seemed genuinely moved. Elena nodded. They should be. It was their mining station that we saved from the last swarm cell. The war against the Devourer had continued for 8 more months after the Battle of Andromeda Nebula. The Coalition had hunted down every remaining fragment of the Collective, pursuing them to the very edge of known space. It had been brutal, exhausting work. But it was finished now. The galaxy was safe. Any word from the Assembly? Elena asked. Chun smiled. They've formally requested that the Coalition rejoin. Full membership, no restrictions, and they want to establish a permanent joint defense force under human command. And our response? I told them we'd consider it. After a proper committee review, of course. Elena laughed. You're terrible. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. Above them, the stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched humanity's rise from a single world to galactic protectors. Do you think they'll come back? Elena asked quietly. The Devourer? Chun considered the question. Intelligence suggested that the surviving swarm elements had fled beyond the galactic rim, disappearing into the vast darkness between spiral arms. They might be regrouping, or they might be dying in the emptiness. There was no way to know. Maybe, he said finally. But if they do, they'll find something they didn't expect. Which is? A galaxy that's learned to fight back. Elena looked out over the colony where the lights of a dozen species twinkled in the growing darkness. In the distance, she could see the construction sites where new defense platforms were being built. The galaxy had changed. The long peace was over, but in its place had come something stronger, unity forged in the fires of war. The children growing up here will never know the old assembly, she said. They'll grow up in a galaxy where humanity stands guard. Chun nodded. The war makers keeping the peace. Think they'll understand the irony? Does it matter? The galaxy is safe. That's what counts. As they walked back toward the colony, Elena's comm unit chimed. She glanced at the display and smiled. What is it? Chun asked. Message from the Ethereal Collective. They're requesting human advisors for their new military academy. Chun raised an eyebrow. The Ethereals want to learn warfare? Apparently. They've decided that pacifism is a luxury they can't afford anymore. They walked in silence for a moment, processing the implications. The galaxy was changing in ways none of them had anticipated. Species that had never known conflict were learning to fight. Old alliances were being replaced by new bonds forged in battle. Elena, Chun said suddenly, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed in the assembly? If we'd followed their protocols? Elena stopped walking and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Devourer was still alive, still hungry. But here, in this place, 50,000 people lived and worked and raised families because humanity had chosen to act instead of debate. No, she said firmly, I don't wonder. I know exactly what would have happened. We'd all be dead and the galaxy would be empty. She started walking again, her boots crunching on the gravel path. But that's not the galaxy we live in. This is a galaxy where the war makers stand watch, where monsters learn to fear the dark. Behind them, the memorial stood silent sentinel over the colony. In its polished surface, the stars reflected like distant suns, eternal and unchanging. But the galaxy they watched over was different now. It was a place where humanity had proven that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to be willing to wage war, and in the depths of space, ancient sensors registered the passage of coalition patrol ships, their crews alert and ready. The warmakers had returned to their eternal vigil, guardians of a galaxy that had learned the price of complacency. The Devourer had awakened humanity's warrior spirit, but in doing so, they had also awakened something else, a galaxy's determination to never again be helpless in the face of extinction. The age of the Assembly was over. The age of the warmakers had begun. End of story.